Montana Territory, July 1883. The sky was still dark when Verena Talbot jumped from the back window of the white-columned house, her boots hitting the dew-wet grass without a sound. Her heart pounded so loud she was certain it would wake the entire town of Miles City. She clutched the small leather satchel tight to her chest, nothing inside but a handful of coins, a locket, and the letter that had made her run. She ran toward the river, skirts tangled around her knees. Behind her, the house stood cold and still. But she knew he would come soon. He always found her. Her fiancé, Horace Barrick, had broken the nose of a man just for looking at her. He had screamed at her for speaking to a store clerk. He had torn pages from her journal and burned them before her eyes. And now, with the wedding just 4 days away, she had seen the truth written in the bruises on her arm and the fear in her reflection. She would not become his wife. She would rather disappear. The trail was rough, and Verena's boots were thin. By the time the sun rose over the hills, her feet were blistered and her lips dry. She walked until her legs gave out, then crawled into a thicket and stayed as still as the rabbits. She did not cry. She had not cried in weeks. That afternoon, a wagon passed close by, but she did not move. The man driving it did not stop. It was nearly dusk when she heard hoofbeats. Slow. Unhurried. She crouched low in the brush, heart hammering. But the rider did not call out her name. He did not shout threats. Instead, a quiet voice reached her. "Looks like you have not eaten in a while." She peered through the brush. A tall man sat atop a chestnut gelding, his hat low over his brow. His shirt was dusted with trail dirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His horse stood still, patient. "I have water," he said. "And jerky, if you want some." She stepped out slowly. Her dress was torn, her hair stuck to her face, but she lifted her chin. "I do not want trouble," she said. The man's eyes met hers, calm and unreadable. "Neither do I." She hesitated. He unslung a canteen from his saddle horn and tossed it gently toward her. She caught it with both hands, drank, and nearly wept at the taste. He dismounted. His boots hit the earth with a quiet thud, and he led the horse forward a few steps, holding the reins loose in one hand. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated again. Then, "Verena." He nodded. "I am Merritt Pike." She stared at him. "You are not going to ask why I was hiding?" "No," he said. "You look like someone who had good reason." Verena's throat tightened. Merritt opened a saddlebag and pulled out a strip of dried meat. He held it out. She took it, fingers brushing his. "Come on," he said. "Camp is not far." "I cannot ride," she said quietly. "My legs are too sore." He paused. Then, without a word, he unbuckled the saddle and hoisted it off his horse. He set it on the ground, stepped back, and held out the reins. "Take Rio. You ride. I will walk." Verena stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Merritt met her eyes. "Because you look like you need someone to walk beside you." Her chest hurt. She climbed into the saddle slowly, wincing. Merritt adjusted the stirrups, then gave Rio a light pat on the neck. The trail was quiet as they moved west, Merritt's boots crunching dry grass, the wind rustling the cottonwoods above. He said little, just pointed once toward a ridge where camp smoke curled in the distance. At the fire, he helped her down gently. She sank onto a flat rock, and he handed her a blanket. "I do not know where I am going," she said. "You do not have to know tonight." She looked at him. "I left someone dangerous. He will not stop looking for me." Merritt's jaw tightened. He fed another stick to the fire. "I will keep you safe," he said. She shook her head. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." They slept a few feet apart that night. Verena curled in the blanket, the saddle beneath her head. Merritt dozed with one hand on his rifle. By morning, she could walk again. He offered her coffee, and they shared a quiet breakfast. Then he asked, "You planning on heading west?" I was, she said, staring toward the mountains. But I do not know where to go. I do, he said. There is a small ranch near Billings, owned by a widow. She takes in women who need a place. No questions. Verena looked at him. Why are you helping me? He finished tying his bedroll. Because I have seen what men like him do. She felt her breath catch. They traveled slow. Merritt never pushed her, never questioned her silences. He showed her how to read river bends and check for fresh tracks. He told her about his years running cattle in Wyoming. About the brother he lost in the war. He did not ask about Horace, or the bruises, or the look that sometimes passed across her face when she heard hoofbeats behind them. On the third night, they camped near a stream. Verena watched as Merritt knelt to wash his hands, the firelight catching the lines of his face. She had never met a man who did not demand something. Merritt had given her his saddle, his fire, his silence, and asked for nothing back. That night, as they sat across the flames, she said softly, "You are the first man I have not been afraid of." Merritt looked up. His voice was quiet. "You do not have to be afraid ever again." She did not sleep much that night. When she did, it was only after he murmured, "I will stay awake. Just rest." She woke to find him still sitting upright, rifle across his knees, eyes on the trees. And she knew. She was safe. For the first time in her life, she was safe. They reached the edge of Billings 5 days later. The town was small but growing, with new wooden storefronts and a busy rail line. Merritt led her to the edge of a quiet ranch tucked beside a grove of poplars. A white-haired woman in a blue apron opened the door and took one look at Verena before pulling her into a hug. Merritt waited outside. When Verena came back out, her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. "She said I can stay," she said. Merritt nodded. "She said I can help with the garden, and there is an extra room." "That is good." She looked at him. "You are leaving now?" He did not answer. She stepped toward him. "What if I asked you not to?" Merritt met her eyes. "Then I would stay." Then she took his hand. And she did not let go. The first frost came early that year. By mid-September, the grass along the Yellowstone turned brittle underfoot, and the cottonwoods lost half their leaves in a single windstorm. Verena stood on the porch of the ranch house, sleeves rolled, soil under her nails from the root cellar they'd finished digging that morning. She watched Merritt haul fence rails across the yard without looking up, his gait steady, his coat open to the chill. "You'll catch cold if you keep ignoring that wind," she called. He paused, glanced back, and brushed the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Only if I stop moving." She stepped down and walked toward him, the hem of her skirt brushing the dry grass. "You could rest. No one's asking you to run yourself ragged." "I don't rest easy," he said, setting the last rail on the pile beside the barn. Verena folded her arms, watching the way he flexed his fingers, slow, deliberate, like the joints had stiffened. "Your shoulder's worse today." Merritt didn't answer right away. Then, "It never healed right. Shrapnel near the socket. I favor it, but the cold makes it bite." She reached out and touched just above the seam of his shirt. "You never said anything? You never asked?" Verena held his gaze, then dropped her hand. "Come inside. I've got bomb warming on the stove." He followed her without a word. Inside, the house smelled of rosemary and boiled apples. She poured water into a basin and set it near the hearth, then dipped her rag and wrung it tight. "Sit," she said, pulling a chair close to the fire. Merritt lowered himself slowly, his jaw tightening. She knelt beside him and eased the fabric of his shirt down his arm. The scar was long and paled with time, but the skin around it was red from strain. "You ever think about going back?" she asked, smoothing the cloth down his shoulder. "To where?" "Wherever you came from before this." He looked into the fire. "No one left to go back to." Verena pressed the bomb into the muscle gently. "I didn't mean people. I meant the land. Someplace that felt like yours." There was a stretch outside of Laramie, he said after a pause. Used to ride out to a grove of aspen when I needed quiet. But the railroad took that land 3 years ago. She set the cloth aside and rubbed her fingers to ease the cramp. You miss it? Sometimes. Not the quiet, just the feeling that you could belong to a place. Verena stood and wrapped the cloth again. I've never belonged anywhere. You do now, he said, eyes still on the fire. She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed to the stove and stirred the pot of apples until the scent deepened. Then she turned. Mrs. Hartley wants me to take the ledgers for winter supply orders. Says I've a better head for numbers than she does. You always were quick. That's not what people used to say, she murmured. They didn't see you right. She lifted the spoon, tasted, then set it down. You ever been married? No, why not? He leaned back slowly, shoulder easing into the chair's curve. Didn't know how to give anyone more than half of myself. At least, not until now. Verena turned from the stove, her breath catching. He met her eyes. I've watched you grow into something unshaken. Not because the fear is gone, but because you live past it. She crossed the room and knelt again beside him, her hand finding his on the armrest. I'm not whole yet, she said. I'm not asking you to be, Merritt said. I'm just asking you to let me stay beside you while you become her. Outside, the wind rose, scattering leaves across the porch. Inside, the fire cracked, and the air between them warmed. Verena leaned against his knee and rested there, her breath slow and even. Merritt's hand came to rest on her shoulder, light as snowfall. Either of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. The last of the potatoes had been dug from the garden bed, and the sky above the paddock wore the dull gray of early October. Verena set the basket down on the porch step, brushing dirt from her palms as Merritt led a roan filly through the gate. The young horse tossed her head once, then followed obediently as he clicked his tongue low and even. She's coming along, Verena said, rising to meet them halfway. Still skittish at the shoulder, Merritt said, patting the mare's neck. But she's listening now. Verena reached out, letting the horse sniff her fingers before stroking the white blaze between her eyes. You've a way with the quiet ones. He gave a short nod and unlatched the lead rope, letting the filly wander toward the water trough. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, lighting the sweat on Merritt's collarbone. She's not the only one who's been listening, he said. Verena crossed her arms, brow lifting. To what, exactly? You've stopped looking behind yourself when you walk the fence line. She looked down at her boots, one toe scuffing the edge of a stone. That wasn't deliberate. Still worth noticing. They stood in silence a moment. A pair of geese wheeled overhead, calling once before fading toward the river bend. I heard from Calhoun at the post, Merritt said, tugging off his gloves. Barrick's name came up. He's been through Miles City asking questions. Paid a man to ride as far as Livingston. Verena's jaw tightened. That's only 3 days north. He's losing steam. Folks won't give him directions without a marshal's letter, and he hasn't got one. She met his eyes. You're certain? I'm sure of the man who told me. Calhoun's not one for gossip. Verena exhaled, long and slow. He'll burn through the territory if he needs to. He doesn't care who he hurts. Merritt stepped closer, voice low. I do. That's why I'm telling you now, if he shows even a shadow near this place, I'll see to it he turns around empty. She studied him. You believe it's your place to protect me. I believe it's my place to stand where you want me. Verena's shoulders eased, but her voice stayed steady. Then you'd better know I won't be run off again. If he comes, I won't hide. He nodded once. Then I'll make sure you don't have to fight alone. She looked past him toward the barn, where the afternoon light softened across the shingles. Mrs. Hartley asked if I'd stay through winter. Take over the ordering and help teach the new girl from Red Lodge. You said yes? I did. He smiled, faint and easy. You're good at building things. She tilted her head. You mean ledgers and shelves. I mean truss. he said. That's harder than shelves. She swallowed, throat dry. I keep waiting for something to fall apart. Maybe it already did, he said. And this is what's left standing. The wind shifted. Verena stepped forward and laid her hand on his chest, above the place his heart beat steady beneath the worn flannel. I want you to stay. Not just near. Merritt's hand found the curve of her waist, grounding and sure. Then I will. She leaned in, slowly, as if the air between them needed permission. Their foreheads brushed. No rush. No fear. Just the quiet certainty of two people who'd already crossed the hardest parts alone. Inside, the kettle hissed low on the stove. Outside, the horses moved in the paddock, hooves soft against the earth. And between them, something new had settled, stronger than safety, deeper than shelter. They didn't name it. They didn't need to. But it was theirs now. All of it. By November, snow had dusted the tops of the absaricas. The air tasted of smoke and iron, and the ground took longer to thaw each morning. Verena stood in the barn loft, hands deep in a sack of feed, when Merritt called up from below. Do you mind riding into town with me? She leaned over the railing, brushing out husks from her sleeves. I thought you needed to mend the tack line. I'll finish it after. I want to show you something. She studied his face a moment. His tone wasn't light, and his eyes weren't teasing. She nodded, and he saddled the horses without another word. They rode west, past the split elm and the half-frozen creek, the sky a pale wash of color behind them. Verena's scarf pressed close under her chin, and she kept one hand low on the reins, the other inside her coat for warmth. Merritt didn't speak until they passed a long stretch of open ridge, where the wind snapped at their sleeves and the horses picked their way along a rocky descent. There's a parcel of land outside town, he said finally. Belonged to a man named Thrasher. He passed last spring, no kin. County's been sitting on it ever since. Verena glanced over. You thinking of buying it? I already did. She stopped her horse. He kept riding a few more steps before turning to face her. You what? I've been saving near 10 years. Didn't know what for, but now I do. She eased her mare forward again, heart caught somewhere between her ribs and throat. You're planning to run cattle? Eventually. But it'll start small, some fencing, a warm roof. They crested a rise, and there it was, a low-slung cabin, old but straight-backed, with a stone chimney and cedar shutters. The grass out front was flattened with frost, but someone had cleared a path to the steps. Merritt dismounted and waited. Verena slid from the saddle, boots crunching in the brittle weeds. She took a few steps forward, then looked back at him. You did this for yourself? I did it for us. Her breath clouded in the air. She turned toward the porch and stepped up, pressing one hand to the doorframe. The wood was smooth from weather and wear, but sturdily built. There's more, Merritt said, pulling a small key from his coat pocket. He crossed the yard and dropped it into her palm. You open it first. She turned it in the lock and pushed the door inward. Inside, the hearth was swept clean. A cot stood near the far wall, and beside it a pine table with 2 chairs. Shelves lined the back corner, empty but solid. A pair of boots waited by the door. Verena stepped in, slow, like she was stepping into something sacred. She touched the nearest chair, then turned to him. I don't know how to belong to someone, she said. You don't have to, Merritt replied. Just let yourself belong here. She took his hand, rough and dry from rope and weather. You mean with you? His eyes held hers. Only if you want to. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed to the hearth and knelt there, brushing her fingers along the stones. She remembered fires built in silence, meals shared without asking, a man who had walked beside her without once looking down. I want to, she said. Merritt stepped closer. Then this is ours. She stood and faced him, and he reached for her not with urgency, but with the same steady care he'd shown since the day she stepped from the brush with torn skirts and a torn past. His hand touched her cheek, and she leaned into it. I thought love was something that came with noise, she said. But you never raised your voice. You just stayed. I'll keep staying, he said. And when he kissed her, it was without hesitation, without fear, without need of permission. It was the kind of kiss that came after miles and silence, and all the long work of healing. When they left the cabin, the sun had dipped behind the ridge, and the frost was already forming on the grass again. Merritt helped her onto her horse without a word, then mounted his own. As they rode back to the ranch, Verena looked over at his gloved hand resting easy on the reins, his posture relaxed, his presence beside her as natural as the road beneath them. She reached over and took his hand. He didn't look at her. Just threaded his fingers between hers and held on. The snow came heavy the second week of December, thick enough to hush the world by midday. Verena stood inside the cabin, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders as she watched Merritt tamp down a path from the porch to the woodshed. His coat was dusted white by the time he returned, arms full of kindling, cheeks ruddy from the cold. She opened the door for him and stepped aside. The warmth from the hearth wrapped around them both. "You're wet clear through," she said, brushing snow from his collar. "Sit. I'll hang your coat." He hesitated, then let her take it. His shirt beneath was damp at the shoulders, but she said nothing, just draped the coat near the fire and set his gloves to dry. "You've hardly stopped all day," he said, watching her move. "There's a pot of beans warming, and the bread's risen enough to bake." "It's nothing." "It's more than nothing." She turned, pausing in the quiet between them. "I don't want you catching sick." "You're not afraid of much anymore, are you?" he said, voice low. "I'm still afraid," she answered. "I just don't let it keep me from living." He nodded once, then sat, stretching his legs toward the fire. "I've been thinking about spring." "What about it?" "I'd like to build a second room. And a porch that wraps around. Maybe a place for hens." Verena sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "You planning on doing that alone?" "No," he said. "I'd like it to be ours. All of it." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then we should plant something too. Not just oats and beans. I want flowers. Colors that last past the frost." "Anything you want," he said. They ate by firelight, the wind hard against the shutters. Later, when the dishes were done and the hearth burned steady, Merritt pulled a small pouch from his coat. He held it out, fingers curled around it like it might vanish if he let go too fast. Verena took it, puzzled, and opened the drawstring. Inside was a ring, plain silver, no stone, but worked smooth and strong. "I had it made in town," he said. "Didn't want to ask until you'd settled here, until it felt like yours too. But now I know. This place, this life, we built it the way we needed to. Quiet and honest. I don't want to call you mine unless you want the same." She didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced the band, then closed around it. "I've never worn a ring without feeling owned," she said. "But this feels like something I get to choose." "You do." She walked to the window and looked out. Snow layered the trees. The horses were tucked warm in the barn, and the sky was beginning to clear. She turned back, stepped to him, and held out her hand. "Put it on me." Merritt slid the ring onto her finger, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. She leaned forward and kissed him, slow, her hands resting over his heart. "Let's not wait," she said. "We've already done the hard part. Everything after this is just the living." They were married 2 mornings later, standing under a cottonwood with its branches bare and white with frost. Mrs. Hartley brought a wool blanket and a Bible, and the preacher from Billings rode out with his collar high against the wind. There were only a handful of witnesses, 2 women from the ranch, 1 neighbor from the far pasture, but Verena didn't need more. Merritt's hands were steady in hers, and his vows were spoken without hesitation. That night, they returned to the cabin with their boots damp and cheeks stung from the cold. Merritt lifted her over the threshold, not for tradition, but because the snow had piled high against the step. Inside, the fire was already going. She'd left it banked just enough to catch again. He set her down and removed his coat, and they stood there a moment, watching the light flicker across the walls they'd made their own. She took his hand and led him to the chair by the fire, where he'd sat that first night she tended his shoulder. She pulled his hand into her lap and held it there, warm and quiet. "You never asked who I was before I left Miles City," she said. "I didn't have to." "Why not?" "Because I saw who you were becoming." She looked at him, eyes soft. "You might have saved me." "No," he said. "You saved yourself? I just had the good luck to walk beside you." The wind had died down outside. Snow settled thick on the roof. Inside, the cabin held heat like a promise. They sat there long after the fire settled, their fingers laced, their feet brushing beneath the quilt. No noise but the ticking of the kettle and the steady breath of two people who had already survived the worst. And now, there was only peace. Years later, the porch Merritt built wrapped all the way around the house. The garden bloomed early with blue flax and foxglove, and chickens pecked lazy in the sun-dappled yard. Verena kept the ledgers for the ranch until the widow passed the reins to a younger woman. Merritt repaired harnesses and taught boys from nearby farms how to read the trail and treat a horse with patience. They planted trees that grew tall and strong, and every spring, Verena added a new row of flowers. She never looked over her shoulder again. And Merritt never stopped reaching for her hand when the sun dipped low and the world turned quiet. They lived out their days side by side in the house they built with care, and every night they closed the door on a world that had once been cruel, and opened their arms to something gentler. They were never alone again.